Good morning to you. First of all, as an independent specialist in reducing the problems between wildlife and other issues and people and their pets, I'd like to thank the people who fund this work. Natural England, which is the nature conservation agency in England, the UK Kennel Club, and also Whitehall Board and Ecotown, who you'll be hearing a little bit about later on in the presentation. So first of all, for those of you coming from all parts of the world, let's give you a little bit of context about dog ownership in the UK and particularly in England. We've around 7-8 million dogs in the UK. We don't have specifically accurate figures because there's no compulsory dog registration or microchipping in the UK. But we do know from other studies that there's a dog in around 20 to 32% of all homes, depending on the type of home and where it is. Quite uniquely in England and Wales, we have this network of what we call public rights of way, which is quite a dense network given the size of England and Wales, giving around 140,000 miles of linear routes where people can walk or cycle or horse ride, and that's in countryside as well as urban areas. And those are very strongly protected under law. In Scotland, where I now live, there's a general right of access to pretty much all land in Scotland, reflecting the access traditions in, say, Norway and Sweden. And that also includes Donald Trump's new golf course, much to his surprise in coming to Scotland. Dogs are taken on around 40 to 61% of all visits to the countryside and urban green space in the UK. So walking dogs in the outdoors is a big issue in the UK. Because of this, and because of the high proportion of people walking with dogs in the countryside, there's been increasing pressure, given that we've got development taking ever-increasing amounts of green space in the countryside through houses and factories and this sort of things. There have been increasing calls from wildlife protection agencies to put more restrictions on where dog owners go and what they do. This is either in relation to dog bans or saying that we need greater on-lead or on-leash restrictions, depending which side of the big pond you're on. Also, nature conservation agencies and charities are increasingly looking to graze amenity areas with sheep and cattle. This is because keeping the grass shorter is better for a greater diversity of plants and invertebrates and reptiles. And again, this creates additional conflict with walkers with dogs, because clearly people wanting to exercise their dogs in areas where there's sheep and cattle creates an additional pressure. So in essence, we've got the nature conservation agencies wanting to do ever more to protect what's left. And also this has generally promoted the feeling that dogs are bad for wildlife in general, although we know from studies that actually that's a sweeping generalisation. It can be, but it doesn't always need to be. But also when we're seeing increasingly development of our small country, we can see that dog owners are victims too. I point you to a study that was done in Winchester, a city in the southern England, where dog owners were asked to survey the sites of where they could walk their dogs in the area. And just over half felt there were fewer places for them to exercise their dogs than 10 years ago. And also, if they did have to go somewhere else because they lost somewhere to exercise their pet, that would involve them either walking or driving another, on average, 12 minutes, which again, when we're thinking of the environmental impacts of pollution from motor vehicles and this sort of thing, also has wider environmental benefits beyond the individual sites. But also one of the most interesting things with this is that dog owners said that when new houses or factories were built on green space, there was a double impact on them. Because to start off with, often where these buildings were being put in was green space that dog owners already used, and so they weren't able to use it because it was built on. But also, if this was leading to new housing, we also know that we'd got around a quarter to a third of those houses would be occupied with people with dogs as well. So that exacerbated the problem, a double whammy, as you'd call it. So dog owners were being the victims too. So we looked more over the last 10 years. There's been a lot of people trying to influence where dog owners go and what they do, but it's not always been informed by good evidence. And some recent studies are finding out, what do dog owners actually want from green space? Because often these are the things that are bringing conflict with nature conservation interests. And time again, this was one study, but it's been repeated in other areas, that the top 3 things that dog owners are wanting in the UK, but from my work recently in Australia and New Zealand, it seems to be reflected out there. The top 3 things: off-leash access, by far and away the top thing, but also having this close to home and away from traffic, so this dogs can be exercised every day, allowed to let off lead and socialise and do all those things that dogs like to do, interacting, bum sniffing, whatever it may be. But some people would say, well, irrespective of what dog owners want, if we've got this precious wildlife, why don't we just enforce the law against these pets of Satan, or whatever people might tend to categorise people walking their dogs, as why don't we just use the law, which we see happening in the US and Australia and New Zealand, to find people? Well, in the UK, it's uniquely different in many ways. For a start, local councils or national governments generally can't ban dogs from these public rights of way, so they can't say you can't go. Councils can designate on lead areas, and this happens in city parks and more urban areas, but actually in the countryside, councils are very reluctant to do it because it's actually really, really difficult to enforce when there's such a network of access. There is quite extensive legal protection for companion animals and for farm animals, but actually for wild animals, the protection is very variable. So, for example, you could have a situation where if a dog goes into somebody's garden and mauls their pet rabbit, causing unnecessary suffering, that can lead to prosecution in terms of unnecessary suffering. But if that was a wild rabbit, it wouldn't generally be an offence. So wild animals in the UK, at certain times or certain places or certain species are protected, but not generally. And again, it's very difficult in the courts, if you say a dog owner has been negligent or intentionally caused disturbance, to actually prove that that particular dog on that particular day for that particular bird or mammal actually was involved. So generally we found that relying on legal measures alone is not an effective management tool for reducing the conflict between dogs and wildlife. So this is where the European Union comes in, because Europe can enforce legislation on its member states. And in this case, the particularly important bits of legislation are the Birds and Habitats directives that come from Europe. And these say that development can't take place in a member state, which includes the United Kingdom. I know some people in the UK are still in denial that we're part of Europe, but generally there's an acceptance that we are. But it says that development can't be sanctioned by local authorities if that's likely to lead to a significant adverse effect on protected wildlife sites. If an initial assessment says that yes, there could be this likely significant impact, local councils have a choice to do one of three things. They could refuse the planning permission and not allow the development to take place, but there's increasing pressure in the UK to actually build ever more houses to meet that need, and that comes from central government, so that's often difficult. They could modify the development to say, well, let's have fewer houses or put it somewhere else, but often that's limited. And mostly what happens is they try and build in some mitigation to say, yes, we know there's going to be some issues, so how can we mitigate that? And generally in developments, because we know that between a quarter and a third of homes are going to have a dog in them, dog ownership is seen as an issue that we need to mitigate for. And we've seen already that actually just relying on legal sanctions or saying that people living in these houses can't have dogs has been found to be ineffective. So a new approach was needed. And this new approach that's being used in the UK now is called SANG, Suitable Alternative Natural Green Space. And the principle behind this arose from the need to develop houses to, for those of you who flew in, basically the areas for about 20-30 miles to the west of Heathrow Airport in southern England. And this was an area across 11 local authority areas where there were 13 nature conservation sites that were important at a European, if not international level. And there were concerns here about reductions in the number of ground nesting birds, such as nightjar, Dartford warbler, and woodlark. And so the idea here is, instead of the model that we see in many places where we say, well, we'll just tell dog owners not to go there, or ban them, or do whatever they may be, the idea is that we provide more attractive additional green space for dog owners that is more attractive than the wildlife areas. So this happens in one or two ways. There can be existing green space which potentially could be used by walkers with dogs, but in some ways it's not as attractive as it might be. So in this situation, additional gates are put in. People are being, really explicit that it's actually okay for your dog to have take-off lead access. Or in the picture on the right-hand side, a double gating arrangement has been put in into a larger car park so that dogs can't run immediately into the road if one gate is left open and this sort of thing. But fundamentally, one of the most encouraging things that's happened, or illustrates this approach to best effect, is that developers are being forced to buy brand new land or buy up farms to provide dog-friendly spaces. So for example, looking at this site out near Aldershot, Rook's Nest Wood, this was, until a few years ago, a working livestock farm. But because of the need for mitigation, bolstered by the European legislation, the developers have had to buy this green space and turn it into a really brilliant place for walkers with dogs. And as you can see from the pictures here, even before it was originally opened, dog owners were colonising this, just like birch and other plants do on other green spaces. There's a vacuum, nature fills it, in this case with walkers with dogs. So there's large car parking, it's completely off lead, there's dog poo bins and just all the sort of things that we know dog owners really want. So what are these principles about these SANG, these sites of alternative natural green space? The fundamental thing, and this is why it's so different to what we maybe see elsewhere, is that these need to be designed to be more attractive than the wildlife area. So dog owners want to go here. So it's not saying you shall not, it's just getting really good compliance because dog owners want to go to these places out of choice. And we know that if you give somebody a positive choice, there's not really going to be a need for enforcement because they just want to enjoy their time with their dogs, and these places better accommodate that. They have to be wholly off-lead, they need to be safe and traffic-free, but also they need to be visually attractive. I know some of the dog parks that I looked at in Australia and the United States recently were around the back of the sewage works or some token poo-filled ghetto for dogs, which was, just left after the development. This turns it completely on its head. It says we want these to be so good that dog owners don't want to go to the wildlife area, they come here. SANG need to accommodate walks up to about 5 kilometres, but we know from the research that generally a circular daily dog walk for a dog owner is going to be about 2.7 kilometres. And how this is all funded is that the housing developer, who's making profit from building on these areas, contributes, it depends on the situation, but on average, around £10,000, so around 12,000 euros or 16,000 US dollars, into a fund that buys these green spaces and manages them for the lifetime of the new development, which is, it only happens because we've got good underpinning legislation. Another example is at Whitehill Borden Eco-Town. This is an area where the military are pulling out of it because of the changes in the whole New World Order, if you like, that we need fewer soldiers and fewer places to keep them. And this is an area, again in southern England, that's surrounded by sites that are protected for wildlife at European level. And here it's saying that what they're wanting to do is to provide sufficient green space within these 5,000 homes so that people can just walk. They don't even need to get into their cars to actually get to some dog-friendly green space, because once people get in the cars, they have a lot more opportunity to drive to a wildlife site. So let's hit the bigger environmental agenda, avoid them taking their dogs in their cars to go for a walk every day, and approach it in that way. Also, when people even look to move here, the estate agents are giving them information about which might be the best homes to move into if you're dog-friendly because of the proximity to these places. And also in new home packs, they get information to say where the local vets are, the great dog-friendly places, making it really, really easy for dog owners to do the right thing. Rather than them moving in and finding, don't go here, natterjack toads, birds or whatever, clear off, you're not welcome. We recognise, we see from other studies, the tremendous benefits of dog ownership in terms of taking regular exercise and companionship and these sort of things. And the approach here is about promoting the good things about dog ownership, but also planning to actually minimise the negative impacts. So to just give you an example here, the central area, these buildings here at the moment are all military buildings. Those are going to be knocked down and new housing put in. And the red areas illustrate where these new dog-friendly places are going to be produced so that people can walk to them on a daily basis rather than go to the wildlife sites. At the moment, this is what some of them look out, nice sandy areas, but frequently used by tanks. So we are taking the tanks away because that would be somewhat concerning to the dog owners. Some of these areas will be opened up and provided in grassy areas. There'll be some thinning of woodland and all those sorts of things. Also, the design of SANG is improving as well, because if we've got areas where pond or water features where there can be sensitive wildlife, providing additional dog-friendly water areas where there's like free draining surfaces so dogs can come out without getting muddy, attracts dog owners to use these rather than other places. And also providing fenced-in areas so that people, if they don't have so good dogs, they can train them well. So, in summary then, let's think about what this means for managing issues in relation to dogs and wildlife nationally. If we make it easy to do the right thing, we can get really good compliance in protecting some of our most special places without reducing the benefits of dog ownership. If we look to address the causes of conflict rather than just respond to the symptoms, we can do a lot better. And it's really crucial to engage in the early process of land use planning through councils about dog owners' needs, because once the development has gone ahead, that's often too late. We need robust planning laws that recognise the needs of dog owners and wildlife to plan out these issues. And basically, we do have the knowledge to do this, but as ever with a lot of these things we'll hear about over the next few days, it often comes down to politics and money. So there you are. There's going to be, for those of you in the UK, specific guidance published this autumn telling people even more how to provide dog-friendly green spaces in new developments. In Australia, the work of Virginia Jackson and Tim Adams of Pius has produced some good documentation already. And if you want to know more about the Whitehill and Borden Eco-Town, there's a website there. And do tell me if you've got any more good or bad examples of land use planning for walkers with dogs. Thank you.